Hey there, how there, ho there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 baseball video as I'm wearing the Toronto Blue Jays jersey, if you will, the light blue one this time. And today we're going to be looking at the top 10 most lopsided MLB trades of all time. I know I did the best and the worst trades, but we got to look at the lopsided trades, the ones that were one-sided and all that. It was hard to actually maneuver as I did my research and got 10 very good ones. Here we go. Number 10 is Mookie Betts, traded from the Red Sox to the Dodgers 2020. This was a massive move and all that. This was, of course, before COVID ruined everything. Boston had Mookie Betts, who did well a few years ago, years prior, getting to the World Series, and David Price also was still with Boston. I mean, where was this for the 2015 Blue Jays? We could have been to the World Series if David Price actually did his job in the postseason. So Boston traded Betts and Price to the Dodgers for Alex Verdugo and prospects. Verdugo's a decent hitter and all that. I think he's with another team, is he not? I think he's with the Giants. But anyway, yeah, Betts came out of nowhere to lead the Dodgers to the World Series in the COVID years, and Mookie is still was part of the double title of 24 and 25. So yeah, Boston got fleeced. Number 9 is the John Smoltz trade to the Atlanta Braves. This actually ended up, Detroit kind of fleeced Atlanta at first. So it's late in 1987. The AL East is a 3-horse race between the Blue Jays, the Tigers, and the Yankees. So anyway, the Tigers needed somebody to help them win the AL East. So they decided to trade John Smoltz, a minor leaguer and Michigan native, to Atlanta for Doyle Alexander. Doyle Alexander actually was a Brave by way of the Blue Jays after they traded him in 1986. So Doyle Alexander came to Detroit, and it worked out. Doyle Alexander was 9-0, undefeated with an ERA under 2 in the stretch drive, helping the Tigers snatch the AL East from the Blue Jays. Although you got to say that the Blue Jays choked completely in that final week of 87. John Smoltz, on the other hand, it worked out quite well for Atlanta. He was one of the 4 aces with Maddox, Glavine, and Avery. So yeah, John Smoltz became a Hall of Famer. Well, you can't blame the Tigers. I mean, they got the 87 AL East crown, although they lost to Minnesota in the playoffs. So anyway, the Tigers knew what to do and all that. Number 8 is Joe Morgan to the Cincinnati Reds. I know you say this is stupid, this should be higher up, but yeah. People forget that Joe Morgan was a Houston Astro at first. He played 6 years for them, and then Houston didn't think he was going to do well hitting wise, so they decided to trade him and others to Cincy for Lee May and Tommy Helms. Mostly because they heard Lee May was a pretty good bat and would do well in the Astrodome. Well, honestly, no. Lee May sucked, and he was part of the 79 Orioles that almost won the World Series but lost. Whatever happened to Joe Morgan? Well, he was the second baseman on the Big Red Machine that had the catcher be Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Tony Perez, Dave Concepcion, George Foster, Ken Griffey Sr., Dan Dreesen. You know, he won 2 MVPs too, so Morgan knew what he did in winning 2 titles. So the Astros were basically left with egg on their face. One honorable mention is that Houston and Baltimore were involved in a massive trade in 1991. This wasn't the last time some powerful Houston hitter. In 91, Baltimore mortgaged 3 players for the one of Glenn Davis, hearing how good of a home run hitter he was in Houston, to try to swing for the fences of Baltimore. One tiny problem, Glenn Davis was a better road hitter than all that. So anyway, that turned out to be terrible. Well, the 3 guys Houston got, well, Pete Harnsich, not bad, but he was better as a Red. Steve Finley, who was a great outfielder for many teams, and also Curt Schilling. You may have heard of him. Anyway, that was number 8. Yeah. Number 7 is Ryno Sandberg to the Chicago Cubs. Philly had a shortstop problem. They didn't think Larry Boa would re-sign, so they had a problem. The Cubs also had a shortstop trouble with Ivan de Jesus. So the Phillies decided to make a shortstop trade. Phillies would trade Larry Boa to the Cubs for Ivan de Jesus. But the Cubs, with Dallas Green in the front office for the Cubs instead of the Phillies, said that Ryan Sandberg had to be put in the list. The Phillies said, fine, 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 and traded away Sandberg to the Cubs. Only problem was a couple years later, he proved Philly wrong in that famous Sandberg game against St. Louis, in which he hit 2 game-tying home runs off of Bruce Sutter. Sandberg was a Cubs icon, got to the Hall of Fame, whereas Larry Boa was okay for the Cubs. De Jesus really didn't work out for Philly. They didn't have a good shortstop till maybe Kevin Stalker. But the fact is that the Phillies did some dumb move and all that, trading away Ryan Sandberg. He was just a throw-in. Yes, he was, Joe. Number 6 is Pedro Martinez to the Bo Sox, 1997. So Montreal had some good pitching and all that. In 94, they mortgaged Delano De Shields, their second baseman, to the Dodgers for this Pedro Martinez guy because they couldn't agree on a contract with De Shields, and the Dodgers needed a second baseman after Jody Reed left. So they decided to trade away Mr. De Shields. Montreal nearly went into rapture, but thankfully Pedro pitched well in 94 to prove that the trade was a good one. A few years later, he would be the Cy Young winner for Best Pitcher in the National League in 1997. He would have over 300 strikeouts. He would outduel Pat Hankin in a Montreal-Toronto game and did well. Montreal had problems. They had financial instability due to the 94 strike and all that, so they had to trade Pedro away. They traded him to the Bo Sox for Carl Pavano and Tony Armas. They both were serviceable, but not really great. Pavano would actually win a ring with Florida in 2003. Worst of all, Pedro was a Cy Young winner in Boston. He started the 99 All-Star game, did well, and then saved Boston's butts in 99 by pitching 5 scoreless innings against the Cleveland Indians to get the Red Sox to the ALCS. So, yeah, Montreal ruled the day, but finances just hurt it. But Pedro Martinez in 2004, after he won the title, basically said that this title belongs to the people of Montreal. So at least he was not a meanie and all that. And speaking of Montreal trades, of course, in 95, they had to trade away players. So they traded away Marcus Grissom and John Wetland. Their massive returns was Fernando Seguino, Roberto Kelly, and I think someone else. I can't remember. But yeah, Montreal had cut bait with a lot of people. Number 5 is Frank Robinson to the Baltimore Orioles, 1965. Frank Robinson was a good hitter. In 1956, he won the Triple Crown in the National League for home runs, average, and RBIs. And he led the Reds to the 1961 World Series appearance against those pesky Yankees. However, they didn't think so. William DeWitt, the Reds GM, said that Frank Robinson was an old 30. So they decided to trade him when they had the chance. So they traded Frank Robinson to the Orioles for Milt Pappas and 2 others, feeling that Pappas is a good pitcher. Pappas was a good pitcher for Baltimore in a sense, and he went to the Cubs and pitched a no-hitter for the Cubs. It wasn't half bad. It was just the fact that Frank Robinson turned out to win the Triple Crown in the American League that very same season, 1966, for batting average, home runs, and RBIs. He won the MVP. Well, why wouldn't you give him MVP? And helped the Orioles win the World Series in 1966 against the Dodgers, who were supposed to be good with Koufax and Drysdale. But yeah, Frank Robinson won a title. In 1969, he and the Orioles actually were close to winning the World Series, but those miracle Mets ruined him. 1970. Was he there in 1970? When Baltimore played Cincy and he's basically stole the show against his former club? I think it was. But yeah, Frank Robinson would go to Cleveland and the Angels won other teams and all that. But yeah, a young 30, more like an old, not like old 30. Sorry, DeWitt. Number 4 is Jeff Bagwell to the Astros, 1990. So Boston needed some help in the stretch drive, AL East stretch drive. Sounds familiar? It is. Because the Blue Jays and the Red Sox were battling tooth and nail for the AL East. And then all of a sudden, the Red Sox found out they could get Larry Anderson, a serviceable reliever from the Houston Astros. Boston actually decided to trade this minor league third baseman by the name of Jeff Bagwell, knowing that third base would be occupied by Wade Boggs, although a couple years later he became a Yankee. And they didn't want to trade Phil Plantier or Scott Cooper, so they traded away Bagwell. Well, Anderson pitched 15 games for Boston, wasn't really good in the playoffs against Oakland, but Oakland were a dominant team. He went on to San Diego and the Phillies. He actually pitched for the 93 Phillies in the World Series. Did you not know that? Larry Anderson did. What would happen if just Jeff Bagwell? Well, simple. He played for Houston his whole career. He never suited up for the Red Sox, so he's a one-team guy. Cracked everything open. 1991, he moved to first base. He became the all-star that the Astros needed, and he won Rookie of the Year. He won an MVP, I think, and he was part of the Killer Bees for Houston in the late 90s, so that worked out quite well. And Boston were left with egg in the face, especially with, of course, you couldn't move him to first base because Mo Vaughn was at first base. Number 3 is Nolan Ryan, traded to the Angels 1971. Nolan Ryan was a pretty good pitcher. Everybody knows about his exploits with Houston and Texas, especially Texas during that 7 no-hitter of his career against the Blue Jays on Canadian TV on CTV with Don Chevrier on the call May 1st, 1991, the same day Ricky Henderson was the Stone Base champion. But people forget that Nolan Ryan actually started out life with the New York Mets. And what's even more shocking, did you know Nolan Ryan actually had a World Series ring with the Mets? That's right. The 69 Miracle Mets had Nolan Ryan on their roster. And you probably never would have guessed. But anyway, the Mets would trade Nolan Ryan a couple years later in 1971 and 3 others to California for the want of third baseman by the name of Jim Fregosi. The Mets had terrible third basemen, and in fact, Fregosi would work out. He only played 146 games for the Mets. He made so many cautious errors. I think he went back to the Angels. I don't remember. But yeah, Fregosi would become manager of the Phillies and the Blue Jays in his career. Nolan Ryan would just strike out guys left, right, and center, even though the Angels couldn't get to the playoffs much under Nolan's control. In 1979, the Angels did make the LCS against the Orioles with Nolan Ryan on their squad, but then Nolan left for Texas in 1980, signing with the Astros. So yeah, the Mets basically blew it, and maybe they would have done well in 1973 with Nolan Ryan, although he was a bit wild. Number 2 is Lou Brock to the St. Louis Cardinals, 1964. Lou Brock was a pretty good hitter and all that. He was a good outfielder for the Cubs. He wasn't useless. The Cubs decided they needed a starting pitcher to help them out in the playoffs, so they decided to trade Lou Brock to the Cardinals for Ernie Broglio. Broglio, unfortunately, had a terrible career that declined massively, and it just hurt. The worst part for the Cubs was that Lou Brock became a Hall of Famer, had the stolen base record for many years until Ricky broke it, key to multiple World Series wins, and yeah, he was pretty good, and he got 3,000 hits too. Good old Lou Brock. So yeah, so Lou Brock was putting on a show and all that in 1964 and helped the Cardinals out as a good leadoff hitter, and they won the 64 World Series. And number 1, well, why wouldn't this be number 1? It was Babe Ruth to the Yankees. The Red Sox sold Babe Ruth for $100,000 cash up front and then a loan of $300,000. Well, unfortunately for Boston, it just bit them in the ass. Everyone knows about that. But did you know that actually, thanks to ESPN's series Top 5 Reasons You Can't Blame, and that's the Red Sox for getting rid of Babe Ruth, that Babe Ruth kind of ran himself out of town in a sense because of his behavior and his cock of the walk style thing. Yeah, he actually quit on the Red Sox late in the season. He wanted to pitch more. I get it. He's a good outfielder. He liked to hit, but he liked to pitch all that. So the Red Sox basically were upset with him, sold him off, and all that. They didn't think that Babe Ruth would help the Yankees win World Series, but oh brother, they did. The Yankees were pathetic before 1920. No titles or even World Series appearances for the New York Highlanders / Yankees. And then all of a sudden, Babe Ruth was the big piece. They got Lou Gehrig. They signed Lou Gehrig out of Columbia University, and they became Murderers Row, and Boston would not win a title until 2004, 86 years. Well, I'm a Leaf fan, so if that happens, then the Leafs wouldn't win the Cup till 2053. Got 27 years to go. Huh. But yeah, that was big for Lou Brock and all that. And then Babe Ruth. Didn't know it started a dynasty the wrong way. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.